Angeliki. I'm very happy to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here. It's an honor. So hello, everyone, whatever part of your day it is. Thank you for joining us. So my name is Angeliki Patsiavou, and today we are going to cover the great topic of change management and why it's so important in low-code projects, whether you're using Power Platform or any other technology, and why it's very important. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce myself a little bit. So I am a business applications MVP based here in the UK, a very prolific speaker, probably because I am half Italian, so it's in my blood of a sort, but I also love blogging. I have a blog called empoweredhumans.net, and you can find the QR code here. And also, I'm a human evangelist. Now, you might wonder what that is. Usually you hear about tech evangelists, but otherwise, here you go. Here's a new term. And essentially, this is something that I coined as a term early on when I started in the community, because I realized that it's very important not to just evangelize about the tech that we love and create solutions for every day, but also the human impact that we have and how it's really important to advocate for users and their needs. So with that in mind, I've been in CRM for my whole career. That's over 11 years now. And I've had actually 3 different careers within the CRM space. So I started off as a marketing and commercial manager, so pretty much an end user, worked with loads of the different tier 1 systems, including all the lovely Microsoft CRM systems, then moved into change management because I truly believed that there was a better way of implementing and adopting new solutions, and then eventually moved into something that is very close to my heart, which is functional architecture and embracing the full-blown geek in me. So I'm a bit of a hybrid when it comes to being an architect, and I really enjoy interacting with clients and bringing their users' needs to life. Another thing that I've been very passionate about in the last 2 years is being the global co-pilot community lead for Avanade for business applications. So this is the company that I work for as well here in the UK. And by creating and growing this community, I have been able to support the growth of new skills for people that are able to find different kinds of projects, build their skills within the AI space, and also do it in a way that really supports the sense of community and belonging, which I'm sure we can all relate to, considering how much the Microsoft community gives to us. Outside of work, I am definitely a geek as well, and I love martial arts and music, particularly singing. So you're going to find me doing one of these things. Either way, feel free to reach out. I love connecting with you all through the community, either through the blog empoweredhumans.net, LinkedIn, or any other social media. So enough about me. Let's move into the agenda for today. And I'm hoping that we have a little bit of music lovers in the room, because the whole theme of this session is actually rock and metal music. So you're going to see loads of different music puns throughout the slides, and hopefully you're going to enjoy this little geeky game as much as I did when I put it together. So the first thing that we're going to look at is a journey back in history. I thought it would be a great way to talk about the importance of change management by looking at the history in the last 100 years of modern software engineering and how we got here. We're going to spot a few patterns that I think you're going to really relate to, which really paint the picture in terms of why change management is important. After the journey through time, we are going to talk about the impact that no or poor change management can have to any project. You're probably going to relate to it. We've all been in bad implementations, whether we've been on the development side, the end user side, or any advisory position. We've definitely seen some bad implementations. So we're going to see how change management can have a role in it. Then we're going to move on to 5 different principles, and we're going to look at best practices as well as the importance of infusing them through your change management program in your delivery program and how everything goes together. So the first thing, and you're not going to be surprised, is data. Why is it important to invest early on in a data strategy? The second thing that we're going to look at is your functional architecture, the early plan, the early vision, how to plan around it, how to bring that together, and also build the right team. The third thing that we're going to look at, and again, this is all in the spectrum of how this aligns to strong change management. You won't be surprised about this one, citizen development. Of course, we love creating makers. We love creating citizen developers that can really enable new skills and drive software development in the business. But it needs to be done responsibly. It needs to be done thoughtfully. So we're going to look at a few of the practices there. The fourth thing that we're going to look at is security. I know it's not a sexy topic, and it's a little bit of a hard one. But when it comes to governance and security, we cannot really mince our words. It's very important to invest in it early on as well, and to really understand how it's everyone's responsibility and not just administrators, for example. And then the final principle, which is actually an organic outcome and success, if you may, is adoption. So instead of talking about change management as a separate initiative, something that maybe only has to do with comms and training, absolutely not. We're going to look at how these four initial principles lead to organic success. So adoption within your low-code implementation is actually an organic result of your investment early on in the project. So with that in mind, I did promise you a journey through time. So we're going to look at a brief history of computing, starting with the Second World War. Now, I don't know how much of you are familiar with that kind of wartime history. I only, to be honest, got closer to it in the last 2 years through a series of interesting events, including volunteering for the Museum of Computing here in the UK. But what happened? So we are talking about the period between the 40s and the 80s. So within that, we are in the middle of the Second World War. And at the time, there is Bletchley Park, which you may be familiar with. This is also where the National Museum of Computing is really situated here in the UK. We had a series of very bright academics that essentially were code breaking the Enigma machine, which was the machine that the Germans used to use to decrypt their messages through all the war tactics. And the first feat that really pushed us into what eventually became the modern world of computing and software engineering was the invention of the Colossus machine. You might have heard of Alan Turing or the imitation game that became very popular on Netflix, whereby Alan Turing, leading a team of scientists and academics, has created a machine that could decrypt this kind of messages from the Enigma machine, mind you, without even looking at it. They didn't even have access to it, but he was able to devise the strategy that fueled the Colossus machine. And this is where we suddenly going into mainframe computing. Without realizing it, he started a massive era. And slowly, software engineering as this discipline started to form. Now, at the time, this was just a big dream. And obviously, it was at a time of dire need for the world. If we move post-war, in the 80s, 90s, and I'm sure we have a lot of 80s and 90s babies here in the room, we have a very interesting trend. Obviously, we're past war. The interesting turn of personal computers comes along. And I don't know if any of you also had your first computer back then, but we obviously saw a very big rise. So when it came to Apple and Microsoft, they were competing for who's going to have the coolest new gadget for everyone to enjoy. And obviously we had the Atari game. So any gamers in the room, I'm sure you remember that as well. But ultimately, that leap was about connecting to the masses, appealing to consumers. And at the same time, we also started witnessing the first steps into ALM and essentially moving into a more client-server era. So there was a lot of things happening, right? We were trying to appeal to consumers. There was more progress in the back end as well. But it wasn't until we moved into the 2000s that we started progressing our architecture. And what I mean by that is that there was more and more emphasis on pushing for mobile first. At the same time, we looked into richer architecture that moves away from the monolithic infrastructure. And we also started looking at practices around Agile and DevOps, which is fantastic. It's something that we take for granted today, but we have to look at where it all started, right? And be thankful for that, because this is the foundation for scaling up at an enterprise level. And then it wasn't until 2010s, and particularly 2014, that a Forrester analyst mentioned the term low code. So interestingly enough, this is when we start getting into the era of low code. From the first time it is mentioned as a term, all the way to the rollout of Power Platform, and eventually all the different products and their developments, and truly meeting day by day, month by month, year by year, with all the new products, meeting the needs of end user computing. Now, this is an interesting story about the journey of modern computing, but what does it all mean? What is the common denominator? And the reality is that it was always chaotic. It was always a jungle that we had to navigate. We didn't necessarily have the right tools or the right strategies to meet client demands, to meet user needs, but we always had to rein in the chaos. And this is a very interesting common denominator, because we find this in every project that we're in or every new solution that we're trying to develop, and a way for us to consider how we could do better. And this is why having the support of a strong change management program starts to arise, because it's about supporting the people, and not just end users, but also the whole delivery team, all the developers, in every way that they can be successful and know that their investment of time and effort is going to result in strong adoption and ultimately make a difference. So I do believe that numbers speak louder than words. I did promise you I'm a geek. So, and this might be a number that you've seen before. So Gartner, through some research, estimated by next year at this point, so not too long from now, 75%, which is a big, big number, of new applications developed by enterprises will use low code or no code tech, up from less than 25% in 2020. Now that is mad, because of the power that we hold with our skills and the technologies that we drive. But we know that with great power comes great responsibility. If you want some more numbers, Gartner did some more research at the end of, actually the beginning of October last year, and a fantastic article was launched about looking at similar research, but in terms of use of agentic AI. And what they essentially said is that by 2028, they estimate that most business solutions, and by most, I mean 33%, are going to have a version of agentic AI infused, compared to less than 1% back in 2024. That's insane as well. So not only are we seeing a massive rise of using low or no code tech, but also we are at an exponential pace infusing AI as well. So we have a big responsibility here to do things right, to consider and drive that human impact. So I wanted to include also the importance from Power Platform perspective that we hear and evangelize. I have a small quote here from Ken Aguillard, who is one of the principals, and very much talks about governance. So you might be familiar with him as well, because he has a lot of the office hours. But it's a bit of a balancing act when it comes to working on Power Platform. So this is another study, and this is a Forrester study that happened in summer last year. And this is really painting the picture of the value you can drive if you do things right with Power Platform. So it was estimated that over 3 years, if you look at your return of investment, it's about 188%, and you can drive over 8 million in net present value. These are big numbers if you talk to C-suite, and these are the numbers to convince to make a case for initial as well as continuous investment in Power Platform. And in fact, because people want to see the returns quite quickly, they don't just want to talk about 3 years. You can already see that money, that investment paying back within the first 3 months. So that's a big important number to consider. But also remember, everything that makes us excited also reminds us that we have a responsibility to do things right. We don't reap those benefits without implementing responsibly. But also, it's not just about the money, it's indirectly about the time and the effort saved. So there's an estimation of over 3 hours saved per user per week through all the different automation that we can drive with our platform. And we know how much we could use. I don't know about you, but I could really use 3 hours back every week. Imagine all the things you could do, whether it's working on something creative, something strategic, developing new skills. It can be pretty powerful, and that's per person. And then there's also a lot of savings when it comes to development of solutions as well. And this can range in terms of how the savings look like. So feel free to dive deep into that Forrester report if you'd like. I've referenced the name at bottom. But ultimately, these are some big numbers to reference, but also remember that can have an impact if we drive the right solutions responsibly for our people. Now, with that in mind, I think it would be interesting also to look at how things can go wrong, because we don't always reap benefits if we don't implement responsibly. So I'm going to give you in the situational example that you may find yourselves quite often. So pro developers, they have great practices, they have established governance, they get things done. Sometimes, if we are lucky and we are in a great, bright world, we have fusion teams that have governance and everything is well in place for them to work in a seamless manner with pro devs. So we have our pro devs working with our makers in a governed fashion. Everything is great. But what are the chances this always happens? Instead of having shadow development and citizen developers that are ungoverned all over the place, with the eventual life cycle of the project being a roller coaster. And when that happens, I think two trends can be easily observed. Number one, it's like the blind leading the blind when it comes to the poor admins that have to keep finding this different users deploying their own pipelines, stumbling onto each other's development, creating issues potentially in production, end users complaining, constant production support escalations, and all of that. And of course, quite often, we also see no change management was there. It's an absolute sound of silence situation. So clearly, there is a pattern of bad practices that lead to these situations. It's not just about not having change management. It's about the reasons that led us there, the people that did not commit to investing in the program, that did not believe in the purpose of having an adoption strategy and ultimately investing at the right time, because it's not just about comms and training. So another picture that speaks more than words. This is a very interesting case study from Cisco, obviously a massive enterprise company. It is back all the way to 2016, but this is not about the time that it happened, more about the outcome and the importance of getting governance right. Otherwise, and how can shadow IT hurt you? So they went through an auditing exercise, pretty standard, right? We all go through them. And initially, they assumed that they have just under 100 cloud services provided, the usual service catalog approach. Okay, that sounds reasonable, to be honest. If that was the number, it's a big enterprise organization. I don't see why this could be terrifying. But then the actual deep dive auditing happened, and they found over 1,200 different services growing triple-digit numbers per year. That is mad. We are talking about double-digit more. And most worryingly is that there was no consistent trace of it. So people were operating in their own silos without any auditing, any governance, any accountability. So makes you wonder, was there at any point when new applications or new services being deployed and people being licensed, was there no business maturity assessment to understand where the business was at? It also makes you wonder, were the different leaders of each business deploying the services and allowing for these licenses to be processed? Did they not speak to each other? Was there no super users or change champions, whatever term you're more comfortable with, also supporting these initiatives? Because usually if you have super users on the inside that talk to each other, these things are figured out sooner. And also because it's not just about deploying services and applications, it's about also licensing people. Was no one there to communicate the process? Was it just a ask and receive it situation? And these, fun enough, these are all change management related questions, and many more exist, by the way, that pinpoint part of the iceberg situation, how we ended up there. Every time I talk about this example, no matter the session or the audience, I really am mind blown by the truly catastrophic effect financially and people wise that these operations, these practices can have. So let's talk about data, because ultimately that's the lifeblood of every application, every solution. When it comes to data, it's especially in the era of AI when we are so dependent on clean, good data to drive outputs. If you don't have a strong data strategy, strong governance, and of course, change management around it, all you can expect is that it's garbage in and garbage out. It's just the natural order of things. But what are some of the best practices you can drive? Well, to begin with, and this is a very good investment of your time and something that your change management team can support you in, is do a mapping exercise. So an audit, which relates very well to the Cisco example as well, a very good audit of where the business is at, and map all the different data points that are being used, A. B, their definitions, all the way to a very fundamental, simple level. Even the definition of what a customer is, what a sale is, how we're measuring revenue, even what we think is fundamental and maybe too simple to define, this is still very important. So create dictionaries out of that and ultimately embed that as part of reporting. I cannot tell you how many times I've observed the same graph, a single pie chart, whatever that is, implemented, or rather interpreted in 10 different ways by each user and leader, because there was no consistent definition of the data and how to interpret the outcomes. So having that story consistently communicated is very, very helpful. Then, this data is also about maintaining the business need to know basis, right? It's creating the right permissions around them. So having your CRUD model, which stands for create, read, update, delete. So role-based access management and permission monitoring is very, very important, not just from an initial configuration, but also from maintaining a healthy process for your applications to be accessed and to be updated. So, for example, users will traditionally ask for the most permissions. They want the luxury, but it's very important that we responsibly and thoughtfully look at what their actual needs are, where they should be aligned, and how to make sure that they have access to the right data at all times. It's our responsibility when it comes to being part of the development and delivery team to implement that governance, and especially in an automated way. So having a JML process, which stands for joiners, movers, and leavers, that also manages the influx and exodus of people moving in and out of roles. Because the more automation you add, the less prone you are to human error from accidental permissioning. And then the third part, and this is also something that your change management team can support you with, is every time you are introducing a change to your data model at a time where you're designing something different in your application, that you have someone by your side that can support you in documenting that, challenging you when needed because they have the wider context of the program sometimes, or maybe other different initiatives that could be clashing with this particular implementation, and also supporting with compliance. So it could be, for example, that new changes are being requested, and it's not just about doing a technical change request, but also having someone who can support you in a change advisory board. So when you're requesting or discussing this change with senior leadership, someone can support you to build a case or maybe your design options. Change managers can be really helpful if you involve them early on. They can be your biggest ally, in fact. And these are all elements that can really drive a strong data strategy because they're part of the bigger picture of protecting our solutions and applications. So the second aspect is, and I think it's a great segue because we're building data that ultimately is delivering a functionality, is that we all wear our functional architect hats on regardless of our roles and make sure that we are always thinking about how robust and performant our application will be with the features we request, with the really exciting cool tech we add, or maybe the requirements that might be a bit unusual to just implement. So like I mentioned earlier, things like a change approval board to make sure that there's proper design, practices and best practices implemented and there's accountability behind them. It's very important because it can be quite very much a jungle otherwise when different decisions are being made without the consideration of how the bigger picture will look like, especially if they create conflict for each other. So some of the best practices that we can look at is, once again, and I don't want to sound repetitive, but mapping and making sure there's proper documentation, which, let's be honest, how often do we find really good documentation available? So another thing that you as a delivery team can be supported by your change managers is a mapping of 3 different pillars. One is the people. The people that are playing a role in using the application are responsible for the data and also how they work with each other. So the different functions and the different kinds of end users that interact, who they are, what their personas are, what their motivations are, what are their previous pain points, and what are the opportunities to help them in their role, because we build solutions to help people in their roles. Then the second layer is going to be mapping the systems. So the different apps, the different services, the different systems that are interacting with each other. Think of it as a little bit of a more accessible version of how you would do your architectural diagram in Visio, where you talk about the different apps and services that talk to each other, but in a way that is more end user friendly. And it details also the business element or the business kind of explanation of it all rather than the technical one only. And then, very similarly, the final layer that brings it all together is the process mapping as well. So again, we're building solutions that are supporting people's roles. So we also want to document what those are, what processes they're trying to fulfill. For example, this is an onboarding system. Sorry, this is an onboarding process. We're using 3 different systems and services, and HR performs this kind of role to be able to onboard a new team member. So mapping this whole, almost like the service blueprint, is something that you can really be supported with, that you don't have to do extra work. if you're part of the delivery slash technical team, but can still find immense value in, especially for the future as you keep building that solution. The second thing is, as you go into the maturity and the long-term version of the project, that you are not just thinking of initially launching something, but eventually enhancing it through further features. Prioritization will become more and more the name of the game. So having those extra champions that can support you in addressing that prioritization sessions, or also having change champions, aka super users from the inside that have been trained and are part of a consistent, strong network that can support you as a technical team to have insider feedback, quick and and consistent quality feedback when it comes to the testing phase, but also a very down to earth kind of feedback channel for new ideas as well, because these are people that as super users understand the systems, understand the legacy issues within the business, and if you win them over, can be massive supporters during the adoption phase and the production rollout. And finally, the support that you can also get is from a business continuity perspective. And what I mean by that is when you're looking at your disaster recovery plans, your rollback plans, and all of that, having people that can also support you in the business communication of that aspect, rather than just putting a technical delivery plan together, is also very important. So obviously, we don't want to talk about this worst case scenarios, but it's important for them to have, to have been thought through, have a place and a plan just in case it happens. They also need to be communicated. You need to let users know that if they cannot access a critical system on day one of the rollout, what is the backup plan for them? They still need to perform a critical role. So how do you help them instead of them swarming through production support and the service desk not being able to support? So being your supporter from a change management perspective to communicate these processes without you having to worry about the time and place to do them, that's also very, very helpful. The third layer that we were going to talk about is citizen development. Now, it's great to drive fusion development to bring pro devs, makers, and all sorts of citizen developers together, but it doesn't happen without effort and thought into things, because usually when some leader decides to invest in that, they also want to think about their wider enablement piece of their business to give more opportunities to people, but also to their business to accelerate their growth. So there's a vision there, but it needs to translate into action. So how does this relate to change management? First of all, and I know that we're all used to talking about the COE kit and how it can really support from a governance perspective, which is true. I like giving it a little bit of a twist to it by translating it instead of center of excellence to center of enablement when it comes to fusion teams. And this is because we are talking about a business of humans. We are talking about people that are rethinking their careers, investing in new skills, have to occasionally get out of their comfort zone to do something new, but also have a massive new impact in the business. That's a lot of responsibility, both for the people that are driving this initiative and the people that are impacted by it. So it's very important that we see this as people enablement, and who better to support you in this journey than change managers that have the right skills and and they've been empowered to drive this for the people. Next up, the operating model and the objective. So OKR, which stands for Objectives Key Results. You might have heard about this framework. It's originally a McKinsey framework, but for those of you that may have been familiar with or have used Viva Goals, that's also where you may have seen it as well. But what do I mean by that? One of the failure points that I've consistently observed when leaders have expressed an interest and a drive to implement citizen development is the lack of that initial vision translating into commitment about changing the operating model. So let's think of it realistically. We are talking about people that are traditionally in different non-IT related business functions, but are now going to start investing in Power Platform related skills. If the leaders don't give them the time, flexibility within their roles, and the incentives to do that, how do you expect these people to actually perform long term? If you just consider this consistently as a side of desk role where people have to do essentially overtime and don't have the right learning and support, especially from the technical SMEs, to do this, then there is no way to deliver long term a citizen development initiative. And this is why rethinking your IT operating model within and outside the team function is very important. And through that, you need to add some um, metrics that can really support you, and not just hard metrics. I'm talking about documenting the journey and the milestones. And this is why I'm personally a fan of the OKR framework, which essentially, instead of saying we are going to measure some hard metrics at a specific point of time that we're constantly working towards, we are essentially breaking the journey down into milestones and then documenting also the results that we want to achieve at each of those milestones. Now, this is very motivational for people. It's very tangible. So if you're thinking about SMART objectives, this is very much that as well. But it's very motivational for people because you're breaking down into incremental gains, which from a behavioral science perspective, it's a lot more aspiring, but also it supports the growth long term because you are building the foundational blocks rather than going in a way, it's almost like moving away from a waterfall kind of thinking and going into agile. And the way to also invest in your people is to take advantage of fully available Microsoft's provided programs that are free to access that can really support your people in that enablement and that upskilling journey. So some of them, and by the way, there's many, but one of them is, for example, the Power Up program, where essentially you go through a few weeks of upskilling. You go through all sorts of both live training and self-guided material, we're able to build um, those first steps in your Power Platform upskilling and career journey, which is great because it has a very guided and structured approach that is crafted by Microsoft, and it has had a lot of success stories. So there's people that are sharing their journey, and you can really relate to those stories because they've gone through it so many different backgrounds. Another one for the people that may be more technically inclined or want to really accelerate their technical proficiency within Power Platform is the SUIT program, which is standing for Super User in Training. And you may have heard of this term for super users that are involved in the community forums that are so dedicated and so helpful in supporting fellow users that are just have certain questions or issues that they need help with. These are some of the free programs that you can take advantage of. So it's another way to communicate to your leaders that you don't have to spend a lot of money to actually drive overall your Power Platform journey within the business. You just have to be smart and informed. Then I wanted to share a quote. So this is from Simon Sinek, one of my favorite thought leaders. You may have heard, for example, one of his most famous books is called Start With Why. But either way, one of his quotes is about the difference in terms of communicating with people and motivating them. So when it comes to rule books and rules generally, it's about telling people very firmly and strictly what to do. But if you think about a framework, it's about guiding them without restricting their creative license and freedom. And this is very similar to how we can think about governance versus enablement, because instead of just focusing on discipline and rules and the I said so approach, because I said so approach, we can allow for creativity to give people the space to grow and to really creatively support the growth of the business as well through their innovation, their solutions, and their will to reinvent themselves as well, because there's a lot of courage in that. So, fourth pillar with that in mind is with regards to security. Now, again, I know this is not a sexy topic and not something that people are so excited to talk about, but governance is important. And what's interesting about it is that people don't always realize that it's everyone's responsibility, no matter where you are, whether you're part of a delivery team, whether you're an end user, it's everyone's mission. But the challenge is not only realizing that, but most importantly, explaining the why and making people interested in it. So another way that you can really leverage the benefits of having a strong change management practice is to invest in that kind of security initiative. So first of all, it starts with communicating. You need to communicate to people their role in keeping data, applications, all of it secure, how they are their own front line of defense, what exactly their responsibilities are in maintaining that, and also what due diligence is there to support them. And I'm talking about more than just doing this quarterly or every, 6 months kind of compliance courses where you just click on next. Like I'm talking about really communicative ways of communicating these responsibilities and making this engaging and motivating enough to be involved. And one way to do this, which I found really resonates with people, not just within the security spectrum, but also generally within adoption, is to look at role-based training. Because what this does, and it becomes very engaging as a result, is that it communicates to people what it means for them in their specific role. So whenever I go through training, and the first question is, what part of the business are you? What's your role? And then it adjusts the course accordingly. I feel not just, understood and seen. It's not about the emotional aspect of it per se. It's more about the fact that I'm finding use in understanding exactly how my day-to-day relates to my responsibilities. And it's actually very accessible from a neurodiversity perspective as well, because sometimes we need to be very explicit and not just go through vague content. Now, what this also means is that instead of telling people and communicating SLAs, let's say for completing a course, and we know what SLAs stand for, right? It's all about delivering at a specific timeline and the estimated version of that. XLAs, I don't know if you've heard of this term, but I was fascinated with this term when I first heard about it. XLA stands for an experience level agreement. So this is not about saying I'm committing to delivering something by X date. What this is saying is that I'm committing to delivering a specific experience for you as an end user, which I think is a lot more important and really paints the picture even stronger in terms of the responsibility and the benefit that you have when it comes to really supporting the security initiatives of the program. And something that your change managers can really help you craft a program around this, potentially gamify it as well, and ultimately foster it at the core. And something else that your change managers can really help you with is the use of internal incentives that are directly aligned to performance management. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're rolling out a new system, potentially even replacing a legacy one. Let's be honest, people don't wake up in the morning thinking, well, thank God I get to use a new system today. I'm so excited to add data, or I'm so excited to try a new process. No, people are there to fulfill a role, and it's not going to make them excited alone. But if you make the security goals around completing their onboarding training or understanding the security principles or even being part of an auditing process when needed, if you create certain goals and recognitions around them, recognition incentives that can be part of their performance discussions with their manager. So if you're giving them incentives that this can be part of their bonus and compensation review, if you give them initiatives in a tangible way, they can really relate and they see the benefit. It's simple human nature. But these are also things that need time to be considered and worked on with business leadership that is usually outside of the traditional scope of a technical delivery program. So another reason why you need the right people by your side that can do these things are ultimately driving the success and adoption of the project long term from a people perspective without derailing the delivery life cycle itself. And with all of that in mind, this is when adoption can become an organic outcome. It can become an organic success that can really drive the overall success of your investment in a solution or in Power Platform generally. So this is where it's about taking a step back to consider why we even worked on this piece of tech or this new solution or in this new program to begin with. And there's basic questions that people want answers to, whether they tell you or not. So what? It actually goes back to the example from earlier. People don't wake up each day getting excited about using a solution or a piece of technology. As end users, they want clear, direct answers when it comes to so what? So what if we are implementing a new solution? Why do we even have to do it now? What is the risk? Also, what is the benefit for me? Because I could just ignore that system and go back to my offline approach. So this is very important to communicate, to explain, but to do that, you first need to understand where different people are coming from, which actually goes back to the previous piece of work about mapping people, their personas, their roles, their previous pain points, the opportunities in the future to engage them. It's part of a bigger work and a bigger way of engaging with them. And at the same time, if you give people, and by people I mean end users, a bit of an opportunity to get involved, especially through change networks where you have super users expressing the wider views and needs of their teams, then you may end up at a place where you're co-designing new journeys. And this can be pretty powerful because if you have journeys that have been designed from the people using them for them, then you're almost guaranteeing that you're going to have massive supporters and people that are already bought in to adopt. They're already excited to even participate in testing because they know you're finally going to fix certain problems for them. They know you're finally going to automate these painful manual processes that they've been dreading every day. You already are creating supporters by giving them that voice and that channel. But these channels, for example, establishing a change network, that takes time, that takes care. So it's important that we do this again in the right way with the right people involved. And also building AI learning habits, whether it's within the sandbox kind of functionality that Copilot Lab provides or within a training program where people have the opportunity to learn new skills, to build their AI muscles by building confidence in how to best use AI or any tools that are available to them, whether it's Microsoft 365 Copilot, whether it's one of the functional BizOps Copilots or anything in between, doing things responsibly, productively, that ultimately make a difference. So with that in mind, I wanted to leave you with a bit of an aspirational quote before we go into a Q&A or any kind of discussion you would like to. I truly believe that when it comes to innovation and bringing and continuously using Power Platform into the picture, is that it's a wave that once it starts, it cannot be stopped. But to truly thrive, to truly grow and see meaningful impact, it's about creating the right culture, the right habits, the right humanity in the program that really inspires and aspires to people's, empowerment. So I see it as a little bit of a, let's say, formula of success, if you may. And one of the elements in our equation is that when you're using low or no code tech, make sure that it's serving a wider purpose, whether it's making things easier somewhere, whether it has a strong storytelling power in terms of how it's going to drive better business outcomes, and also how you're driving productivity, both at a micro and a macro level, because people want to see tangible impact, tangible benefits. The second one is, and this is relating to the give people a voice, give users a voice, is to always also listen to them. Having things like a change network can really support that early kind of feedback, or supporters that are really eager to be part of the testing phase instead of constantly begging for volunteers. This can really modernize the service you're providing through new solutions and make it even more real time, because the technical team has people to always reach out to, has people that are already bought in. The next part is an equation, is considering or reframing in our minds how, if we are giving people value through our solutions, through our applications, through our investment in Power Platform, that we are going to get loyalty back. It's about building consistent supporters that see the value that we bring through these solutions, that are able to see the outcomes in their personal role and in the growth of the business. Because ultimately, if you combine all of this together, then you are truly able to create that thriving ecosystem, the culture that supports that empowerment, and ultimately that understanding of how Power Platform can help the business in the long term. And of course, all of these pillars, you won't be surprised to hear me say, since I've mentioned the word change management so many times, is that it's consistently enabled throughout. So it's very supporting of all of these initiatives. Change management is not just comms and training. Change management is not just about having an initiative at the 11th hour, 2 weeks before testing. It's about having a consistent program embedded, infused consistently throughout your delivery life cycle that supports you through all these different activities that I was explaining, that can be your biggest ally and your biggest lever in the human aspect of the delivery. So with that in mind, I would love to take any questions, any comments. Please do rate the session and all of the sessions that you've been a part of, because the organizers have taken such good care and curated such a lovely agenda that we do appreciate any opportunity we have to take feedback and incorporate it for next time. So Michal, over to you if we have any questions from the chat, or if anyone would like to either come off mute or from the chat, make any questions or comments.
Lovely session. I love it because I'm very fond of change management, especially when you've already failed, and what you're talking. I know what you're talking about. So this is great. You make it very nice with the very nice introduction to this.